Hi folks, these introductory guides are aimed at helping new and returning players get themselves oriented in all things Destiny 2. So far we've covered armor, character stats and armor mods, and now we're going to be talking about one of the biggest elements of the game, arguably the biggest, which is namely the weapons in Destiny 2. Destiny 2 is a unique combination of many different game mechanics and genres, but the weapon design and gunplay of Destiny 2 has always been a standout feature. Having played all manner of first-person and third-person shooters, Destiny's gunplay is right up there with the best of them. With a game that's an epic blend of sci-fi and fantasy and caters to both PvE and PvP enthusiasts, making weapons that, for example, can rip a hole through space-time, feel and sound right is no mean feat. When I did my first failed attempt at making this video, I got lost down a deep dark rabbit hole, screaming for my mother, and that's simply because it's such a massive topic. There are currently over 1,000 weapons available in the game, and for each of those individual weapons, there can be literally thousands of variations. That doesn't even include an additional 129 exotic weapons that occupy a niche all on their own. That probably sounds overwhelming, and it can be, but I promise you that when you find the right weapons, and you will find them sooner than you think, the game is so incredibly rewarding. The right weapon selection can turn you from an interplanetary doormat into an all-conquering warrior space god. With all that being said, I won't be going into every weapon in detail, but I will try and point you in the right direction so you can find your own paths and make your own choices. When people talk about the meta of a game, they are talking about specific weapons, armor, or abilities, or a combination of all of those things, which is widely considered to be the strongest or most effective for any given task. Sometimes the meta is very clear-cut, sometimes it's more nuanced, and the meta can change quite regularly as the game is updated, players discover alternate choices or combinations, or the developers feel the need to rebalance certain things that have become too dominant. The game is fundamentally a sandbox and is meant to allow for a variety of different ways to progress. So whilst I always recommend people try whatever the current meta is if you can, if not, don't worry. Focus on what feels right for you first, and then try and find the most effective builds as you go. So the way the terminology works around the different weapon slots has evolved and mutated over time, and what I want to focus on is how best to understand the structure as it is right now. So we're going to call this the top slot, we're going to call this the mid slot, and this third slot is much more straightforward and is always just the heavy slot. The first way to categorize your weapons is through ammo type, so your day-to-day go-to weapons will always usually involve a primary ammo weapon, which has a white icon with a single bullet in it. These weapons always have infinite ammo, you do not need to pick up any ammo bricks or use any armor mods to keep them stocked up. Next you have special ammo weapons. These are for weapons that are generally a bit more powerful and also require green ammo bricks in order to stay replenished. They're generally used for more powerful enemies and or deliver a lot of damage in a short space of time. Finally, you have heavy ammo weapons which will deliver huge amounts of damage. They are generally used for boss fights and or dealing with large waves of enemies. Going back to the equipment slots, it's important to know that in both the top slot and the mid slot, you can have any combination of primary ammo weapon or special ammo weapon. The general rule of thumb for PvE is that you're always running at least one primary ammo weapon, one special ammo weapon, and one heavy ammo weapon. Like everything in Destiny, there's always room for creativity in between the lines, and there's always an exception to the rule. After ammo type, the next way weapons are subcategorized is through their element, and this refers to the particular type of damage they output, and which you can identify through their power indicator. So first you have kinetic weapons, which are marked with just plain white text. Next you have stasis weapons, identifiable through this dark blue color and the frost icon. Strand weapons are labeled bright green with this strand icon, and then you have arc, which is light blue with this lightning symbol, solar, which is orange with a flame symbol, and then finally void, which is purple with this vortex symbol. With the arrival of microcosm in the final shape, every element can now be represented in the heavy slot, as it's the first kinetic heavy weapon. It's important to know that for the top slots you will only find kinetic, stasis and strand weapons, and then in the mid slot you will only find arc, solar and void weapons. Again, in the heavy slot you can have a selection of weapons for every element. Right at the top here we have the name and type of the weapon, usually followed by a narrative line of text relating to its lore and origin. Next we have the weapon perks here, and these are kind of randomly generated, also kind of not, but I will talk about weapon perks in more detail shortly and explain that a bit more. Best way to think about these for the moment is as the available attachments to fine-tune this particular weapon. Next we have weapon mods, and starting with the first box here, this is the infusion box, the same as on armor, where you can infuse the power level of another weapon to increase the power, and again requires an upgrade module. If for example you have another copy of this weapon at a higher power level but a worse selection of weapon perks, you can infuse that and it will only cost you glimmer. Next we have the masterwork box, again randomly generated, but this will allow you to masterwork or increase the level of one particular stat relating to that weapon. Masterworking a weapon will cost a mixture of glimmer, enhancement cores and enhancement prisms, and I would only recommend it for a weapon that you know you're going to want to continue using. Here we have the mod socket, which gives you a selection of mods that will help fine tune the weapon a bit more depending on what you need, such as recoil control, extra ammo, improved hip firing, etc. At the bottom here you'll see intrinsic traits, which gives you an overview of the characteristics of that weapon's particular subcategory, known as frames. Amongst all auto rifles, just for example, there are 5 different frame types which all behave a little differently. Right in the middle here you can see the weapon's element type and its power level, and now is a good time to remind you that power level is important but doesn't determine how good or useful any particular piece of armor or weapon is at all. On weapons, it's the combination of the weapon itself and more importantly the weapon perks, which determines how good a weapon might be. Over on the right here you'll see a table of stats which will give you an initial indicator of how this particular weapon will perform. You'll see if I start messing around with the weapon perks here, the stats start moving around. The reason I say an initial indicator is because your weapon perks can fundamentally alter the way a weapon behaves mid-firefight. The stats and types of stats for each individual weapon can vary, not just because of different perks, but also obviously between different weapon types. So I'm not going to go into too much detail here, but it's important to know you can hover over each of these for an explanation. We'll cover types of weapons shortly. Before we go further into this section, I do want to make it clear that there are ways to find specific weapons through specific activities, or even craft your own very powerful weapons without having to solely rely on random luck. More on that later. Weapon perks in Destiny 2 are essentially like weapon attachments. The large majority of exotic weapons in Destiny 2 all have fixed perks, combined with one exotic perk, and are generally very powerful, and you should by and large always try and have one equipped. For legendary weapons on the other hand, things are a lot more fluid and a lot more expansive, and quite honestly the numbers are staggering. There are literally hundreds of available weapon perks, and thousands of potential combinations, but thankfully not all at once. Each weapon in Destiny has a distinct identity and its own set of available perks, and over time certain weapons have very effective perk combinations that become clear frontrunners, which make that weapon extra powerful and effective. As a lot of legendary weapons generate these perks randomly, it's considered a roll of the dice, so when you get that super popular combination to land for you, that's what's known as the God roll. Over time, your sense of what is a good combination of perks that you like and that you see being the most effective will improve. Experience and patience go a long way. Ask and look at what other Guardians are using and recommending. And there are even websites such as light.gg, d2foundry.com and destinyitemmanager.com which can make the process a bit more streamlined and scientific. Every weapon has a God roll in them, and not every player will agree on what that is. My only suggestion in this case would be to think about what you're looking for. What do you need the weapon to do? If it's for PvE, do you need general and clear, or are you looking to maximize DPS for the boss, for example? Are you going to be up close and personal or fighting at range? Is it for PvP where you need to get on target quickly and efficiently? Have a think about what playstyle suits you best and then go from there. So before we go through the different weapon types, just a reminder that there is an exception to every rule. This is just an overview, and in many cases the right weapon and perk combination can often exceed the limitations of that particular weapon type. First, we'll go through primary ammo weapons. Auto rifles are some of the most versatile weapons in the game for both PvE and PvP. Generally good all-rounders with plenty of great choices for mid to long range engagements. Bows can offer a very precise and high damage output, and almost a constant uptime, as they never really need to be reloaded, but do require an extra degree of accuracy and timing. Hand cannons are my personal favourite weapon type in the game and deal big chunks of damage, with the trade-off being slower rates of fire and longer reloads, but with a bit of practice they are so much fun to use. Pulse rifles are burst fire weapons that can deliver fantastic amounts of damage at good fire rates, but require good recoil control and stability. Scout rifles are the designated marksman rifles of Destiny 2, aimed at very precise shooting at longer ranges, without the ammo and fire rate limitations of sniper rifles. Sidearms are the perfect backup weapons in the game, aimed at quick deployment and dealing very high damage at very close quarters. Submachine guns fire full auto at close to mid-range and offer high rates of fire at the cost of range and accuracy. Next we have the special ammo weapons, starting with fusion rifles, which require a small charge time to fire a very high powered burst of damage at close to mid-range. Breach grenade launchers fire single shot grenades capable of dealing high impact damage or clearing a group of ads, with the trade-off being longer reloads and slightly more erratic behaviour. Shotguns do what all shotguns in every game do, which is get up close and personal and make things disappear. Snipers are used for long ranges and high damage to take out high-powered targets before they can get to you. Trace rifles deliver constant focused beams of energy to whittle down a target's health quickly. Glaives are the Destiny 2 equivalents of a wizard's staff, capable of both close quarters melee combat, ranged energy attacks, and even generating shields. They are one of the more distinct weapon types and extremely versatile in the right hands. Next we move on to the heavy ammo weapons, starting with heavy grenade launchers, similar to breach grenade launchers but now equipped with a drum magazine for extra ammo and much higher damage output. Linear fusion rifles are similar to fusion rifles, also requiring a small charge time, but now aimed at delivering very precise, high-powered damage at range. Machine guns offer up good amounts of heavy sustained fire, great for clearing ads, and sometimes even for taking on bosses. Rocket launchers are some of the most powerful weapons in the game and are often deployed in the endgame, dealing massive damage but with much longer reloads. Finally, we have swords that now come in both special and heavy variants and are usually extraordinarily powerful melee weapons that can also include defensive abilities as well as ranged attacks. Next, I'm going to talk about a few things which will become more important later on the further you get into the game, but you don't necessarily need to worry about them right now. As you've gathered by now, there is a massive selection of weapons available to you in Destiny 2 which can cater to all manner of playstyles, but it can often just feel like a constant lottery waiting for the right role. Well, it doesn't have to be quite so much. When you visit each of the vendors at the tower or the helm for example, they often have a selection of weapons that you can chase using that vendor's engrams. Certain activities such as Grandmaster Nightfalls, raids and trials will have very specific loot tables where you have a much better chance of getting better loot, such as adept weapons which have better stats and a higher chance of good perk combinations. Essentially, the more difficult the activity, the better the chance of getting good weapons, something to work towards and build up to. For some time now, Destiny 2 also includes a very good selection of weapons which you can craft and fine-tune exactly to your preferences. Crafting is worth a whole video all on its own, but for now, if you're new or just returning to the game, you do want to keep an eye out for something the community calls red border weapons. Anytime you encounter a red border weapon, that means that weapon has a craftable blueprint known as a pattern. Every craftable weapon requires 5 red borders to be unlocked. Once you've done that, you can craft or reshape that weapon to your heart's content at the Enclave on Mars. Now with the final shape, you can also enhance certain weapons you find in game. Similar to crafting, except these weapons cannot be reshaped. Both crafting and enhancing weapons cost a decent chunk of material, so only do this if it's a weapon you really want and you know you're going to use it a lot. Weapons in Destiny 2, like so many other parts of the game, are rich in variety and purpose. The game is designed to reward and empower you as much as possible, however you want to play. Hopefully this video has given you a clearer idea of how weapons are structured in the game and will help make it easier for you to find what you're looking for. Be patient, give it time, those god rolls will arrive soon enough. There is plenty here that I can cover in a hell of a lot more detail, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have, or at least point you in the right direction. As always, if you drop a like and subscribe, it's all I'll ever ask of you. Stay frosty, be good to each other, we'll catch you on the next one.